Yeah. Too many years of video games.
Yeah. Whenever I fly left seat, it feels so weird.
Hadley is just finishing up her flight, so she.
Okay, cool.
I'd fly at one as well.
You fly one? Okay, yeah. If you have a flight at one, I'll let you out like. Well, one, go check in at 30 minutes before.
Yeah.
Just let them know that you are here. And say I'm in class right now, and then I'll let you out like 15 minutes before to go pre-flight.
Sweet.
Can't do screen two. Technology. Bear with me, guys. How's everybody doing?
Pretty good.
Yeah. Good, here for review.
Yeah.
You have an exam coming up?
Couple weeks.
Yeah. I look really familiar. I don't know if I've just seen you in here before, or just similar face.
Do you ride motorcycles?
You were in a cycle here?
Yes.
Yeah, all right.
Oh.
Okay, very cool. Wow.
Have I helped you?
Huh?
Have I helped you?
You have. Well, I mean, you didn't really help. No, yeah. Adam, by the way,
Francesca.
Francesca.
Yeah, what?
What's your name?
Oh, I'm Ethan. Yeah.
Ethan?
Yeah.
Cool. Adam.
Ali.
Ali? Charles Name? Adam.
Nice to meet you.
Bear with me, technologically incapable.
I just got it today. It's the
Is that Apple one?
pencil.
Oh.
Yeah. I'm trying to figure out like how you actually write with it, like on the iPad. Where it like will do like lettering for you, or like, because I don't want to use notes. Yeah.
Hi.
Yeah, or like translate your writing to like to typing.
Yeah. That's what it was doing that like when I was on the settings part, like it'll
All right,
if you like try.
is everybody ready? So first, we're all just gonna do a group stand, and we're gonna start. I forgot to do this yesterday, but we're gonna start off with saying the Pledge of Allegiance. So,
Refuse.
Okay, so here we are on day two of week one. We're gonna be covering aerodynamics. Yesterday, we went over the intro to Sling and all the like housekeeping stuff. And we did the pre-flight workshop. Hadley, I'm sure you did your pre-flight with your instructor yesterday.
Yeah.
We need to do another walkthrough, we can. Yeah, today will be aerodynamics. It's kind of a bigger topic. So we have a lot to go over. I think we should be able to get done with all of it today. But we really want to take our time through it and like understand it. It's one of the more important topics. So we'll try our best to get through, but take our time. All righty. cool. They should be seeing this. I don't think anybody's on the Zoom call right now. So aerodynamic. This is essentially how plane flies. You shouldn't be flying a plane if you don't know how the physics behind it. So first thing we'll talk about, at any point, if anybody has any questions, like feel free to stop me. First and foremost, the components of an airplane. There's a lot of smaller components that we'll talk about later, but generally speaking, here's our airplane right here. The wing, another name for that is the airfoil. So you'll hear that used pretty commonly, airfoil or the wing. We obviously have two of those. Next, we have the power plant, which is up front. So that'll be in the cowling. That's going to be the engine, all the engine components, the propeller, pretty much what creates thrust and moves us forward through the air. We have our landing gear. Specifically on the Sling, we have a fixed tricycle landing gear, so they don't retract, and they're in a tricycle configuration. Two main landing gears and then the nose wheel. Moving on to the back, we have the fuselage, which is pretty much the body of the plane. That'll be from behind the power plant back. And then lastly, we have the empennage, which includes different components like the vertical stabilizer, horizontal stabilizer, and then our primary flight controls like the rudders and the elevator. And then we also have a trim tab on the elevator as well. But power plant, which is the engine, landing gear, wing or airfoil, fuselage, and empennage. Any questions on that? And I heard that the last, the IFR class that just happened, she got a standing ovation at the end. So I'm not saying I expect that, but I expect that. So kind of go more in depth on the fuselage and the empennage. Right here on the empennage from this component back, we have different surfaces. The horizontal stabilizer is going to be that horizontal surface that runs through the fuselage. During the pre-flight, you two are here, and then for those of you who know, the horizontal stabilizer, you can press down where the rivets intersect, and you can literally lift the nose of the airplane up. That's how light it is. Attached to the horizontal stabilizer is going to be your elevator. The elevator is going to be controlled with the control stick, the joystick, with that forward and back motion. So the elevator is what's going to control your up and down motion. Attached to the elevator, we have a trim tab. In our airplane, the trim tab is electronic. So once we get more into systems, you'll learn how the generator B powers the battery, which powers the trim tab. On our joystick, there's going to be two buttons. Who hasn't flown yet? You? Intro flight?
Yeah, intro.
Okay. So you'll see when you fly that on both joysticks, there's going to be two buttons on top, and that controls the trim, up and down trim. Next, we have our vertical stabilizer, which is going to be that vertical component, and attached to that is going to be our rudder, which controls the yaw, the nose moving left and right. And that's going to be controlled by the rudder pedals, which are on both sides of the cockpit. In our airplane, the rudder pedals also make the nose wheel go left and right. So that's how we steer while we're on the ground. A lot of other airplanes, the nose wheel does not move. It's just the rudder, but they also have toe brakes. So you can use differential braking to turn while you're on the ground. But while we're on the ground, the nose wheel turns from the rudder pedals. And then as we start to pick up speed, that rudder becomes effective when more air is flowing past it. So therefore, when we press the rudder pedals, it's going to yaw the plane left and right. Any questions about that? Next, we're gonna get into the four forces of flight. So these four forces are happening continuously at all times during flight. We'll go a little more in depth about them right after this picture. But essentially we have thrust, which comes from the power plant and the propeller. That's what moves us forward through the air. That is opposed by drag. There's different types of drag, which we'll talk about. Then we have lift and weight. So lift, there's some physics behind that, which we'll also get into in a few slides. And then weight essentially is gravity and the weight of the airplane wanting to go down towards the earth. In straight and level flight, these are all in equilibrium. They all are equal. But in different phases of flight, one might be more than the other. So first we're gonna talk about lift. Let me get all the bullet points up. So lift, this is the upward and vertical movement that opposes weight. You as the pilot control the lift, and that's using the primary flight control, the elevator, that forward and back motion. So you determine how much lift you want the aircraft to make or not make. This only occurs when the plane is moving forward, so you need airflow. The airflow is going to be present over and under the wings. We're going to talk about something called Bernoulli's principle and then the Venturi effect. That is the science behind how airplanes fly and create lift. That Bernoulli's principle and Venturi effect creates differences in pressure on the upper and lower surface of the wing. We'll talk about that in a little bit, and hopefully that makes more sense. Any questions about lift? No, cool. So as mentioned, weight opposes lift. It has a definite relationship to lift, so it's always going to be there. It's just a matter of, are we producing more lift than we are weight? Lift always has to be more if we want to maintain our flight and altitude. Once we stop producing lift, that weight takes over and we start to descend. Lift is required to counteract the aircraft's weight. So they're just going to said the aircraft wants to naturally go down due to gravity and due to the weight of the aircraft. So we have to generate enough lift to counteract the aircraft's weight. And stabilized flight, when lift force is equal to the weight force, the aircraft is in a state of equilibrium. As mentioned, if lift becomes less than weight, the vertical speed will decrease, meaning we're going to want to descend. And then when lift is greater than weight, the vertical speed will increase, meaning we're going to want to climb or maintain altitude. And then when we learn about some of the instruments, you'll learn about the vertical speed indicator. And that is an instrument we have in the cockpit on the G3X that shows whether we're climbing or descending. So more lift, vertical speed will increase and we'll climb. Less lift, when it's less than weight, our vertical speed will decrease and we will descend. Next, we're going to talk about thrust. So thrust is that forward force, that forward motion, which is produced by the power plant propeller, the engine and the propeller. This opposes or overcomes drag, which is that other force that's wanting to pull us back and hold us back from moving forward. So for us to start moving, thrust must be exerted and it has to be greater than drag, otherwise we won't move. As we continue to move and gain speed, thrust and drag eventually are equal. Once again, equilibrium. This is essentially just when the wings produce horizontal lift instead of vertical lift. So rather than that up and down motion, we have that forward motion. Also, if you want to if you want me to pause, you guys can take notes on this, let me know. If you want me to go back a few slides, so you could take notes on the other three, I can do that as well. Any questions on the four forces of flight so far? No? Good, good. Do I need to go back so you guys take notes on those? Kind of went through them a little quick, so. Good, cool. So now we're talking about drag, which is the last of the four forces of flight. So drag is the force that resists the forward movement of the aircraft through the air. Once again, drag is always going to be there. There's ways that drag increases and decreases, but overall, we need to have more thrust, more forward movement than we do drag. Different phases of flight will cause the drag to change. Every phase, the entire flight, there's going to be drag, and the types of drag will change in different phases of flight. We can't get rid of drag. It's always going to be there. There's nothing that we can really do to get rid of drag. That just comes down to how the aircraft is designed. And we'll talk about these next two types of drag, parasite drag and induced drag. All right, so going into that, how lift is created. There's something called Bernoulli's principle. Originally, when this principle was created, they used fluids as their experiment. So they performed and came up with this principle using fluids, specifically fluid dynamics, so the movement of fluids. Pretty much Bernoulli's principle states that an increase in the speed of a fluid, or in our case, air, occurs simultaneously with a decrease in pressure or decrease in the fluid's potential energy. So as that fluid or air increases in speed, the reaction is that the pressure will lower, it'll decrease. The air flowing over the upper curved surface of the wing is traveling faster, and I'll draw out a picture in a second to show that. But it's flowing faster than the air underneath the wing, and then therefore this creates two different states of pressure over and under the wing. So we'll get into it a little more, but the way a wing is shaped is what causes this difference in pressure. And there's different components of a wing that gives it its characteristics. Can everybody see this okay? So this is how our wing is shaped. This is the top, this is the bottom. As you see, the bottom is a lot straighter than it is on the top. This curvature is called the camber of the wing. The camber is just the curvature of the wing. As air comes and hits the leading edge of the wing, it's going to have to separate. So air will have to go on top and air will have to go on bottom. The air wants to meet at the trailing edge, so the back end of the wing at the same time. I don't know the physics behind that, but that's just how it happens. The air wants to meet there. So the air that flows over the top of the wing versus the bottom of the wing has to travel faster for it to meet at the back at the same time. Think of it as like, if I want to walk from here to this chair in a straight line versus I have to walk in a curve and meet here. If I want to do it in the same time frame, you have to go a little faster when you're walking on the curve. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it's the same thing with the air. The air traveling over the curvature of the wing has to move faster to meet the air that's traveling in straight line. And then therefore, based off Bernoulli's principle, that faster moving air on the top then creates lower pressure. So it loses some of that potential energy. Because that air on the top of the wing, that fast moving air is at a lower pressure, the air pressure underneath the wing is just in general higher. It's not that the slower moving air creates higher pressure air. It's just that it stays the same and then therefore in turn is higher than the air on top, which actually lowered in pressure. It's kind of like a suction action. You'll learn with weather that high pressure always wants to move to low pressure. So that low pressure air is sort of having a suction, like pulling movement, and that high pressure wants to move up. So in the case of the wing, we have lower pressure here, higher pressure here. That air at the bottom wants to go up. And that's what causes the aircraft to want to rise, to stay in the air and not just crash. Does that make sense? Is there any concerns or comments, questions about that? Good. So another sort of law of physics is that there's the Venturi effect. Sort of the same concept. Once again, it was done with fluids, but essentially if you have fluid flowing through a pipe, wherever that pipe gets narrow, it creates higher speed. That fluid or that air is moving at a higher speed. And then once again, it results in a decrease in pressure, but a velocity increase. So it's essentially the same concept as the Bernoulli's principle. But both of these, Venturi effect and Bernoulli's principle, are what creates lift. These are the smart scientists that have taught us how planes are able to fly. Originally, as I mentioned, these were done with fluid, but we were able to take that concept and apply it to aviation. Good?
Yeah.
So here's just sort of a diagram, kind of what I drew. It's the airfoil or a wing. The top of the wing is curved, that camber. The air moves faster over the top of the wing to meet the air that's flowing underneath the wing at the same time, at the same place. Lower pressure is created on top, and therefore the air on bottom is higher pressure and wants to push the wing upwards. Have any of you guys ever heard of Newton's third law? That's something you learn in school. For every action, there's an equal or opposite reaction. As the air follows the curvature of the wing, it changes its direction of flow rather than continues in a straight path. The curvature of the wing, right, causes it to go kind of upwards and then back down. So the air flowing underneath the wing kind of deflects down while the air on top of the wing deflects up. So that's that Newton's third law. So when somebody asks you, talk about how lift is created, you could talk about the Bernoulli's principle, the Venturi effect, and Newton's third law. So this is the lift vector, aka the components of a wing. We have our airfoil here drawn. It's more curved on top. You're going to hear a term called a chord line. The chord line is not a physical component of the wing. It's an imaginary line. So it's not actually there. But the chord line is just an imaginary line drawn from the trailing edge of the wing to the leading edge of the wing. A straight line from back to front. Next, we have the relative wind. So the relative wind is just the air, the wind that's coming in the opposite direction of what we're moving. So if we're going this way, the relative wind is here. If we're going up like this, the relative wind is there. If we're going down like this, the relative wind is coming this way. So all it is, it opposes our direction of flight. Next, we have lift and drag, which where they meet is our center of pressure. So that's going to be where all the pressure is on the wing and lifting upwards. Lift and drag, as we talked about, are two of the forces of flight. So both of these are acting as we're moving forward and trying to generate that lift. In between the lift and drag is the resultant force, and that's the direction that the wings are pushed upward. Question? You sure?
Yeah,
Okay, does this all make sense?
yeah, it does.
Okay,
I do, I mean, I probably will have some questions of like the center of pressure. But for now, that's good.
cool.
I guess,
Yeah, we'll get into more detailed aerodynamics. It's one of those topics where you just need to know the basics. You need to understand the basics, and then as you go through your training, once you're on the commercial level, that's when you're going to start to really understand aerodynamics, and how it works with aviation.
is the center of pressure where the relative wind hits?
It's not where it hits. The relative wind is just opposing your direction of flight.
Yeah.
So that relative wind in relation to center of pressure, it's not the same thing. The relative wind is gonna, where that hits is just dependent on your direction of flight. The center of pressure is just sort of that middle point of where lift and drag meet. So I kind of already talked about it, but we have our leading edge and trailing edge, and then the chord line. Leading edge is just the very front of the wing, our trailing edge is the very back of the wing, and our chord line is that imaginary line that goes from the trailing edge to the leading edge. Kind of already talked about it, but that chord line is the imaginary straight line drawn between the leading edge and trailing edge of an airfoil or the wing. It's in the direction of the normal airflow. And it's referred to as a chord line. So this is like the diagram I tried to use with my hands. But as the airfoil direction is moving horizontally, that relative wind is in the opposite direction of that. As the airfoil direction is moving slightly down, that relative wind is exactly opposite, moving slightly up. When our airfoil is moving in an upward motion, that relative wind directly opposes it, kind of in a downward motion. So it's wherever our direction of our airfoil is going, the relative wind is exactly opposite of that. And you see how the chord line stays the same, right? It's still from the trailing edge to the leading edge in all three diagrams. That doesn't change. The chord line is still going to be from the trailing edge to the leading edge. Another term you're going to hear is the angle of attack. And then for those of you who have done the pre-flight, you'll see on the pitot tube that there's going to be two holes. A bigger one in the front, which is for the dynamic air, the air to move into the pitot tube, and then a tinier one on the kind of at the bottom, and that's our angle of attack indicator. Angle of attack simply is just the angle between the chord line and the relative wind. So as you see in this diagram, our wings are kind of angled up. So that chord line angles up. That angle between the relative wind and the chord line is the angle of attack. So with this diagram, the relative wind is exactly horizontal, which means our airfoil is moving exactly opposed to that relative wind. Your angle of attack can increase or decrease based off of your use of the elevator. If we push the nose down, we decrease that angle of attack. If we give it back pressure, we increase the angle of attack. We have another control surface called flaps. Flaps are a secondary flight control, also electronically powered. We have a little notch directly to the right of the G3X. Right here. And we have 3 different flap settings. We can have it fully up. We can have the flaps 1, flaps 2, or flaps 3. When we add flaps, that can change our angle of attack. So as you see on this next picture, I'll go back to this one. This next picture, we have the flaps extended. This first picture, we have them retracted. So that chord line, that imaginary line from the trailing edge to the leading edge, is still going to be from here to here. And that gives us a certain angle of attack. But as we add flaps, those flaps are going to want to come down, and the more flap settings we add, that changes the chord line even more. So as you see right here, with flaps fully down, that trailing edge is now here versus up here. So we have to draw a new imaginary line from the trailing edge to the leading edge, and that's going to increase our angle of attack. So flaps retracted is going to be a lower angle of attack. As we extend those flaps with each setting, it's going to increase that angle of attack more and more. Make sense? Everybody good? Tough crowd. Stalls. Stall is something that a lot of people, when they hear it, they think of it as a bad thing, but that's going to be a part of your training. Your private pilot training, your commercial training, CFI, multi-engine, you're going to be doing stalls. And the reason for that is you need to understand how to recover from them, how to identify them, and then how to recover from them. Besides training, when you get to an airline or wherever you want to go, you're never going to do a stall. You're never going to try to do it on purpose, but you need to know how to recover from it. So that's why in training, you learn how to identify and how to recover. But a stall is when you exceed the plane's critical angle of attack. That critical angle of attack is, they say generally speaking, it's around like 15 to 17 degrees on normal general aviation aircraft. It's different for every airplane, but there's a certain angle of attack when you increase it too much, you exceed the critical angle of attack. And what happens is the wing stops generating lift. So the air, as it flows over a wing normally, it hits the leading edge. It wants to stay right on top of the wing surface, and it wants to flow smoothly all the way across to the back of the wing. But when you increase that angle of attack, now that air wants to hit the leading edge and separate from the top of the wing. That separation or that disruption to airflow disrupts the production of lift. So now that faster moving air that normally creates low pressure is not doing that. Because it disrupts and separates from the wing surface, we are now losing that production of lift. That low pressure is no longer there. So when stalls happen, it's the loss of lift due to exceeding the critical angle of attack and causing that airflow to separate from the wing. I'm gonna play this video. It's only a minute long. It's just sort of a shows what happened. So you see all of these. This is just yarn that's taped to the wing. You see how they're all flat up against the wing. That air is smoothly flowing over. It's staying tight to the wing. But as this person slowly increases the angle of attack, watch what happens to the yarn. So you see how they're all starting to move now? Look at that. And then as they decrease the angle of attack, it goes back to normal. We'll watch it one more time. starting to pitch up and increase the angle of attack. There's that stall horn. The disruption of airflow. As they bring the nose back down, the airflow resumes like normal and lift is being generated. Does that make sense to everybody? Cool.
So is it a different angle when the flaps are up and down? When you
Yes.
got the stall?
Yeah, so all the added flaps or retracting flaps does, it changes the chord line, which then is in relation to the relative wind. So as you add flaps, that chord line now increases. When you retract flaps, it decreases.
So
the angle
you'd
of
be
attack.
kind of more susceptible to a stall when the flaps are down if you're trying to.
So yeah, when the flaps go down, it increases the angle of attack and puts you closer to that critical angle of attack.
Okay.
Yep.
Does the wing stall from the outside, inside, or the out?
So that depends on the design of the wing. There's different types of wing. A lot of the trainer planes will stall, so like ours will stall from the root and work its way to the tip. It just depends on the type of airplane, how the airfoil is. There's some that have more of like a rounded wing. There's some that have more of like a squared off wing. And then depending on how the aircraft was designed, its stall characteristics are different. But for a lot of trainer planes, it's from the root of the wing out.
That's so that the ailerons still have control.
Yeah, it's generally just safer. Like when maybe it's a bad example, but when we do our pre-flight and we like pull down on the propeller to check the suspension, we're not grabbing it at the tip of the wing, we're grabbing it at the base just because it's more sturdy, more stable. So having a wing that's designed to stall at the root of the wing and then out, it starts at the most stable surface, and then works its way out to the least stable surface. So it generally creates like a better stall characteristic. A little easier to control, and you still have those control surfaces. Go ahead.
Like, so going on what he was saying, so just so I can understand, if the wings are down, then it's gonna be easier for you to stall than if they're up, right?
The flaps.
Yeah, I mean the flaps, not the wings.
Yeah, so when you add the flaps, it increases the angle of attack.
Okay, yeah.
And when we stall, it's because we've exceeded the critical angle of attack. So as we increase that angle of attack, it gets us closer to that critical angle of attack. There's two types of stalls you'll do. You'll do power off and power on. And then when you get to commercial, there's another one, but you don't have to worry about that. Power off are going to be in a landing configuration. It's going to simulate as if you're coming into land, you're really low power setting, flaps are fully extended, like you're about to land, your landing configuration. You'll practice that stall, and then you'll practice a power on stall, which is going to be in takeoff configuration. So only flaps one. So two less notches of flaps. That's going to simulate as if you're on takeoff. So you're going to be at a higher power setting. And when you do these, you'll notice that when you do the power off, you only have to pitch up like 10 to 12.5 degrees. For power on, you're really going to have to pitch up. And that's because the difference in the angle of attack as you extend flaps.
Okay.
Flaps fully extended in the landing configuration puts you closer to that critical angle of attack. So that's why you only have to pitch up to 10, 12.5 degrees. But for the power on, you have a lot more angle of attack to work with before you exceed the critical angle of attack.
Okay.
And that's because you're using less flaps, so the angle of attack is lower.
So what you're saying is when they test you on it, you'll have to pull up way more on your takeoff, get past that critical angle.
Yeah.
Then when you're landing, you won't have to pull up as much to pass that critical angle.
Yes, yes.
Got it.
You're also lower air speeds, which is another factor. We have different stall speeds. But But essentially what we're doing with the power on, power off is we're exceeding that critical angle of attack. But like you said, with the power on, you're really gonna have to pitch up. It's not gonna be, you're not gonna yank it back.
Mhm.
It's just gonna be, you're gonna be looking more at the sky than you are with the power off stall.
That makes sense.
Yeah,
So, because I know that your stall speeds are lower with flaps, is that just because the extra surface area, it helps induce wing, lift a little bit more?
yes,
Okay,
yes,
independent of the critical angle?
yes.
Shift, okay.
Yeah, so that's why, yeah. So if you guys didn't hear, when you add flaps, your stall speed goes lower. So our stall speed with our flaps extended is going to be 40 knots as opposed to a clean configuration, no flaps, which is 45. That's independent of the critical angle of attack. Flaps, what they allow us to do for landing is they allow us to make a steeper descent at a lower airspeed. And it allows us to do that because when we add flaps, it helps generate more lift. It increases drag, but it also increases lift. And that's how we're able to descend a lot steeper at a slower airspeed. So that's why our stall speed then is lower with flaps.
That makes sense.
Cool, good. Any questions from that side of the room or that side of the room? No? Good, all right. So we have different axes of the aircraft. 3 of them. The aircraft rotates or pivots around these 3 set axes. We'll start with the lateral axis. So the lateral axis typically runs from wingtip, and mind you, these are all like imaginary lines. Once again, we don't actually have like a wire or something, a rod going through. It's an imaginary line. Our lateral axis is going to be from the pretty much wingtip to wingtip. And the plane is going to rotate around that wingtip. So that's going to give us the pitch. So if everybody wants to look here, I'll use you as an example. So from wingtip to wingtip, just imagine an imaginary line going through, that's the lateral axis. And then go ahead and just gently move the nose up and down. So our pitch is going to rotate around that axis. Next, we have our longitudinal axis, which is going to be from the nose of the plane all the way to the back. This one is going to be our roll. Our aircraft is going to pivot around that imaginary line by rolling left and right. And then lastly, we have our vertical axis. Imagine we're hanging the plane from a string. We have an imaginary line going through the top and out of the bottom. That's going to be our yaw motion, our nose moving left and right. So we have our lateral axis, which is our pitch, our longitudinal axis, which runs from the nose to tail, and that's going to be our roll, and our vertical axis, that imaginary line through the top of the plane, out the bottom, and that's going to be our yaw. Our pitch is going to be controlled with that forward and back movement of the control stick, which is then going to control our elevators. Our roll is going to be the left and right movement of our control stick. That's going to be used with our ailerons, which are on the wings. And then our vertical axis, the yaw, is going to be with the rudder pedals. Good.
Cool.
Any questions?
No.
No? Makes sense? So as we've already talked about, we have different control surfaces. We have the ailerons, which are going to be on the trailing edge of the wing near the tip. That's displayed with the blue diagram. Those move up and down based off how we move the control stick left and right. The flaps, they're not depicted, but they're going to be here on both sides. Our elevator is in the green. That is on the trailing edge of the horizontal stabilizer. those are gonna move up and down as we move the stick forward and back. And then the rudder displayed in red is going to be on the vertical stabilizer, the trailing edge of that, and that's gonna be controlled with our pedals. So I'm gonna do some quizzing now.
Wait, what is the elevator controls once again?
The elevator is with the joystick forward and back. So if you
And
wanna,
then the ailerons are the joystick accent.
yes, yes. So what are our three axes? Without looking at notes,
Horizontal axis.
another name for it.
Oh, wait, no, that's a stabilizer. I don't know yet.
Anybody, you wanna try? Three axes.
Longitude, latitude,
Oh, yeah.
vertical.
Yep, so vertical, the longitude, and then the lateral. What are the three pivots or movements around each axis?
It is a lateral,
There's the lateral wingtip. to
oh, sorry,
wingtip.
so the attitude, the horizontal, or
So another name for this movement,
is it a pitch?
pitch. Cool. So there's the lateral axis, and that is pitch.
Longitudinal is roll, and then vertical is yaw.
Perfect. And the vertical it will be like this. Cool. Um. You want to redeem yourself?
Right.
Right.
I'm embarrassed.
Oh, come here. How is lift generated?
Oh,
How,
oh, okay,
you
wait.
know it.
Lift is generated from. Yeah.
What are those, what's that principle called? Kind of a French sounding name.
Starts with a V, right? V.
There's another one that starts with a V. But there's one blank principle and then blank effect. And those are the two laws of physics that help us create lift.
Bernoulli's.
Bernoulli's principle,
Principle. And then the Venturi effect.
Venturi effect. Well, what is Bernoulli's principle?
It's higher pressure underneath the wing with the lower pressure on top of the wing trying to meet each other at the same time. And the lower pressure lets the wing lift while the higher pressure like pushes the wing up.
How is that lower pressure created?
Because it's faster moving air, and faster moving air comes to lower pressure.
And that fast moving air is because of,
It's just crossing across.
but what about the wing's design makes that air have to move faster?
It's trying to catch up with air that's separated from the bottom part of the wing.
Due to the
Shape of the
curvature, the camber of the wing. So that's what makes it want to move faster and create that low pressure.
That's
How does a stall occur?
Stall occurs when you've exceeded a critical angle of attack, which means that the air is no longer adhering to the wing. And so it disrupts the
Yep.
pressure differential.
Yep, that airflow separates and is disrupted. And then we stall when we reach that critical angle of attack.
What is the critical angle of attack for the sling?
You know what? That's a good question. Let me look in the POH, or if you guys have the POH with you, let's go ahead and look at that together. It may not be in here, to be honest. I don't see it in there. That's a really good comment.
Right?
Let me see.
Right?
Yeah, yeah.
Tried it.
No, I was showing him my drawing.
So. I don't see anything in the POH. But. According to what I see from the FAA, it's in general aviation, so for smaller aircraft, it's gonna be roughly like that 15 to 18, 15 to 20 degrees. It doesn't mean that, like, if you exceed you saw in that video how as they increase the angle of attack, the air is still flowing and then it slowly starts to separate and become disrupted and then stall. You're not gonna pitch up to 15 and then just immediately fall out of the sky and stall. Like, that airflow has to slowly separate and slowly get disrupted until the weight, or until the lift is less than the weight, and then you stall down. It's not gonna happen like as soon as you hit 15, you're not just gonna stall. It takes like a little bit of time. You might have to hold it. Airflow becomes disrupted and separates. Then that nose wants to come down when you stall.
And then what happens when you stall, and then if you don't ever come back from it? Is that when a spin happens?
So kind of, you're always going to be able to recover from the stall. The natural tendency of a stall, when that nose breaks, you lose lift, so it wants to come down. When you bring the nose down, you start to generate that airspeed. You lower the angle of attack below the critical angle of attack. You start generating lift. So you're always going to recover from the stall as long as you follow the proper stall
Yeah, but I'm
procedures.
saying, like, what if someone doesn't recover? Like they just don't put their nose down. I don't know why someone would want to, but like what would happen to the plane?
So that could result in a spin. I don't know if it's covered in here. But we'll go ahead and talk about it now. A spin is essentially an uncoordinated stall. And when you hear the word coordination versus uncoordinated, that has to do with the rudders. On our G3X, you're gonna see, I don't know if you guys can see it, but below the attitude indicator, there's gonna be a little ball. And it's gonna look something like this. This is our turn coordinator. As you press the rudders, you're gonna see that ball moving in different directions. The goal is to keep the ball in the center between the fence. When we make turns, when we climbing at full power, when we're in stall, that ball is gonna wanna move to either side, and we have to use rudder control to keep that ball in the center. If it's not in the center when you stall, that's an uncoordinated stall and could result in a spin. And a spin occurs due to one wing stalling before the other. They both still stall. One just loses lift. That disruption of the airflow, that separation of airflow over the wing happens first before the other wing.
And will you rotate towards the stalled?
Yes, so that wing will
Okay.
drop
Okay.
and then you'll go
Hmm.
in that direction. So during your CFI training, you're gonna have to do spin training in an airplane that's dedicated for spins and like aerobatics. but the whole point of it is to know how to recover from it. The acronym that we use, and it'll be in your POH. But a general acronym we use is PAIR. So it's gonna be power, idle. Aileron neutral. Rudder opposite. And then elevator to break the stall, or actually, let me say elevator to recover from the stall. So this is an acronym that you're gonna have to hold near and dear to your heart. I've heard of people taking check rides and not knowing spin recovery, and they fail. Everything else was great, but they did not know this acronym. They didn't know the procedures, and they failed the check ride. As soon as you start the spin, there's different phases of the spin, but you're gonna bring that power to idle. The reason for that is if we have a high power setting, now that higher wing is gonna start generating more lift and then put us more into a stall. It's gonna be like dang near impossible to recover. So we wanna do power idle to kind of slow us down and reduce that thrust. Aileron's neutral. If you try to recover from it by going in the opposite direction, you could do like a cross control stall, which is also not a good thing. So just don't even like touch the ailerons. During spin training, they teach you to put your hands on the dashboard and not even touch it. So it's gonna be power idle, hands up here, rudder opposite. And you should know which rudder to press because it should be deflected. If you're spinning in one direction, that rudder in the back is gonna be deflected. So the direction you need to press it, that pedal is gonna be like up, and you just press it completely in the opposite direction. That's gonna cause the plane to now come into this attitude. The spin's gonna be stopped, you're still gonna be nose down, but now use that elevator to slowly pitch back and then bring the nose back up to horizon. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Power after you exit the stall.
Yes,
Sounds
once
scary.
your airspeed, if you're,
It's
once
just
your nose
pretty
down,
accurate,
and you recover from the spin, and you're just nose down, your airspeed is probably gonna start increasing. So you wanna slowly bring the nose up. Recover, let the airspeed get back to normal, and then bring the power back to like normal cruise power setting.
And I imagine slowly pulling back in the elevator, maintain structural
Yes.
integrity.
Yes,
Just disintegrate.
we'll talk about load factor. Load factor is gonna be the cause of why you want to slowly bring the nose up, not just yank it. Yeah, Ollie, how does the spin occur?
Cruise up to a stall.
Okay, but a little more, remember, always in depth. Francesca?
It's uncoordination.
Okay,
That I can relate.
uncoordination, what do we use to keep the plane coordinated? Rudders. So we're having improper use of rudder, either a lack of it or too much of it. And you mentioned that it's an uncoordinated stall. So what happens then when you're uncoordinated? Does one wing not stall? Do both wings stall? Does one stall before or after the other?
One stall, but one might be less stall than the other.
So one wing stalls before the other. They both stall, but one wing's gonna stall first. And when that happens, and that wing, you're up like this, you're uncoordinated, that wing drops, and then you start spinning in this direction, Now the lower wing is continuing to stall more and more. And the wing that's up is gonna start generating lift. So it's gonna keep you in that spin unless you follow the power idle rudder opposite. Ailerons neutral, rudder opposite, and then the elevator to recover from the stall.
You're gonna get upside down in this one.
You're gonna be like, it's a really weird feeling. You're gonna see the ground. You're not necessarily upside down, but you're gonna see the ground. I have a video from when I did mine. I had like the Ray-Ban glasses on, so after break, we can go over that.
That's scary.
I got a little motion sick, not gonna lie, but
Oh, yeah.
it was like fun. It was a super hazy day, so you couldn't see the horizon, which you're
That
more
makes it even worse,
susceptible
yeah.
to motion sickness.
Oh,
It was a good time though.
Like you were doing.
It's called a super decathlon. Yeah,
Is it by wing? Or no?
no, it's a tail dragger though, so. How about it's 12:05, let's take like a 5-minute break, everybody cool with that?
Good.
And then we'll come back in and we'll continue with stability of the aircraft. How was your flight?
It was good.
Good.
It was got your matcha latte.
Strawberry matcha latte.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I was bad. I got one last night.
I know, I was
and this
gonna
morning.
say and be like, how are you gonna go to sleep?
I did shotgun a Red Bull and it'd be fine.
Really?
Yeah,
So am I. It's so weird.
Really?
Yeah.
it's more of like a mental thing. Like I used to drink yerba mate
Yeah, I used to drink those too.
like a lot, and I'm now month and a half, almost 2 months, cold turkey, no more yerba mate.
Good job.
Thank you. And yeah, it's just more of like a habit.
Yeah,
Like I started my day with that, and now it just feels weird.
and I feel like your remote doesn't even do anything like energy wise for me.
No, yeah. I mean, nothing does anything for me with energy. Coffee, Red Bull, just more of like an enjoyable
Uh-huh.
experience to taste. I don't
Yeah.
know.
I mean, we even have like pre-workout. We do that like twice a week when we're going heavy days, and the only thing you get from it is like the tingles.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And 30
I
minutes
hate
later, like
those.
you're tired.
Yeah, yeah.
That's my
They
favorite
don't
part
get the tingles, you don't like it. I
Is that
thought
the
I was the
nicer?
only one, I was like, I hate that feeling.
Nicer from the pre-workout. Yeah, it's my favorite part about taking it.
Really?
Yeah, it's
Do you
so
like
fun.
it? I hate that feeling.
It just makes me feel like I'm
If I'm at the gym, I'm like,
first set.
Mhm.
Pretty often.
Mm-hmm.
But
I like
I've done
Celsius.
pre-workout for a
Oh,
while.
those I can't do those.
Why?
Celsius and Bangs, I feel like they just
Like there's sugar.
they don't sit well with me. Like, the sugar makes me feel like
Like
Not
jittery?
I don't know, jittery. I just feel like I'm like honestly like gonna throw up. Like I used to
Really?
drink a Bang or like a Celsius. I just feel like the sugar and like all the caffeine. I just feel sick.
Yeah, they have like birthday cake and. It's like.
I love them. Maybe it's
There you
because they
go.
make you feel like that. But then sometimes they don't work. Some days I'm like, oh crap, and then another day I'm like, could go to sleep, take a nap.
I know. Yeah, I had to stop taking them for a while.
Yeah.
Because every day being in the gym, we just like smash bang, hit the gym.
Yeah, that's what I
hit it
do.
good.
Drink Celsius, go to the gym.
Yeah, we would, yeah, it got so weird. We'd have it like two, we'd have one.
Really?
And then we'd have another.
Damn,
We'd go in and we'd be like shaking.
really? Hey.
I'd like walk in the gym and, are you guys okay? We're like,
Really? You're like wired and like, what's wrong with these people?
yeah. Did you guys do on your flight today?
We did steep turns. And then kind of just like going back to the very beginning basics. You've flown before, right? Or no, this is
Like
your
twice.
first time like actually, okay, so I'm gonna do this too. Just like, I'm also we're just kind of like getting used to the plane because the other planes that I flew were so like heavy. Like Cessnas, I feel like I had to like put so much might in, and now it's just like a little touch, and so I'm like
I know.
this, and he's like,
Weird,
whoa,
too.
and I'm like, whoa, I don't know, like usually I'm like having to pull back so much. So I'm just like kind of getting, yesterday was my first one,
Really?
so I'm still like getting used to like, and the joystick, whenever, it was like kind of weird. But I actually really liked these planes, I like the big window.
Yeah. I like it too. They've got GoPro mounts on the inside.
Yeah, I
Oh, they
want
do?
to, I was thinking today I want to bring one.
I brought mine, so I can
Really?
like today. Some of them have the GoPro mount on the wing, on the outside. So
Wait, so it takes a video of you or out of your flying outside?
I point it in towards me.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I want to do.
Yeah, but I'm gonna do it like right behind. There's one like right above where your head is. So I'm gonna
Wait,
mount it
that's
there
weird.
so I can like watch what I
Can you
do.
not film it? Or no?
You mount your phone?
Like
I
inside
mean,
the
yeah,
thing?
probably.
Is it adjustable or is it just a generic like GoPro?
It's just a little GoPro mount.
Is there like a knockoff GoPro?
I know, I'm like, I
Works,
wanna get
that's
one,
it.
but not, I don't need to spend all that money on the GoPro for me to take a video on it every time.
I got one for my birthday.
Really?
The official lot, so I
Yeah.
out like on my mask.
Yeah, my brother has one for snowboarding on his helmet
Oh, yeah.
that he literally, I think, used one time
Mhm.
outside there.
A lot of people use it when they're riding too, just so they have like the,
Yeah,
well, I mean, if footage, but like if someone hits them or something like
yeah, I
that.
have one
they
on
have
my
that.
motorcycle helmet too on top.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
how old that one is.
especially for dirt biking. We've got some cool spots we go to.
Yeah,
It'll be good quality though.
that's cool.
It's not-
And that's cool, you can put them everywhere. It's
Yeah.
so little.
Yeah, they are really, I don't really know how to work one though, but I could figure it out.
It's probably the most basic one definition.
Really?
Yeah, it's so.
Oh.
Well, I'm gonna find his and,
I'd say so,
but you
yeah.
have to have
I don't know. if-
something to mount it, right? Cause the plane I was in, they didn't already have one. You have to bring your own, right?
Well, yeah, so you'd have to bring like your own little attachment, but there's some of them have mounts already up on the inside. You just have to bring your.
Okay.
It's like a little slot piece that you have for your
Yeah.
So is it like in spin
It
training?
slides in.
I'm gonna find.
Other than the
it.
sick
I
part,
I
what
was
is it?
literally when I was flying
Let's see if
today, I
I
was like,
can-
I will a video of the right time. It's like,
See if I
probably
can-
stupid.
Fine,
Like-
video.
But I still just wanna see.
And how
I
many
know.
sessions do you do with spin training?
I should also want to listen. to,
One
like,
flight, you do like a
Wow.
3 hour ground,
Yeah,
and then one flight.
Who
Yeah.
does
That's the
instruction
part.
on that?
I am good at that now, but
Some guy, Armando.
honestly, I feel
Is it
like I
like a
just
very
watch YouTube
specific
videos
person?
of just like,
Yes.
like for the weather. And hearing what they're saying, I literally just watched
Might
YouTube,
try it now.
YouTube and just
That
like
may not be.
replaying
the
the same
lesson
video and
you
just
learned
like
like that.
write it down, because at
Oh, yeah.
first they talk so fast.
If
And
I
now,
can handle it.
now it's easy, I can hear everything, but at first I was like, wait, what?
Yeah, they were saying it yesterday and I like missed everything.
Yeah,
Mine's
I
really,
literally-
like, just listen to it and try to get what you
There was
can.
one video, I'll send you it when I find it, and I literally just replayed it over and over again. And just wrote it down and then I love it.
Dang.
What would, for what?
Like,
I didn't get
eight-
the text message.
It is like just the weather,
Really?
like the
Yeah.
calls.
I don't know if
They
you
like
have
when you
my
first ever
number.
hear it, they talk so
Really
fast, and like when I first ever went up in the plane, I was like.
Wait,
what
what's
the
your-
fuck? Like, are they saying?
What's your last
And
name?
then I just
Nelson.
watched videos like over and over, and then obviously now I know, but.
Yeah, there's a,
Go ahead and give me your number.
And my
Six
old
on that.
instructor sent me a
Nine,
video or
972.
something.
Yeah.
50
liveatc.net.
Yeah, I think so.
Alright, let's go and continue. I'll show the video after. Okay, so stability, it's the. So stability is the quality of an aircraft to correct itself in conditions where it's not in equilibrium. And then return to the original position or continue to the original flight path. This is all based off of how the aircraft was designed. There's two types or two categories of stability. There's static and dynamic. Static is going to be the initial for it to return to the initial tendency or back to equilibrium. And then dynamic is going to be its response over time. You'll see on the next slide.
Wait, I'm gonna take a photo. So I can sit.
Yeah, don't slow down, just take notes. So here's sort of a picture of dynamic stability. Within the two types, dynamic and static, there's going to be three sort of subcategories. There's going to be a neutral dynamic stability, positive dynamic stability, and negative dynamic stability. The one we want is positive dynamic stability. As you see with the first one, neutral dynamic stability, once the equilibrium is disturbed, it'll start to oscillate. Like, as you can see, it's kind of like a sound wave, sort of. It's going to be even up and down movement, and it's just going to stay like that. And it won't stop. The dynamic negative stability, that initial disturbance of its flight path, is going to get worse over time. So it's going to start as small oscillations and slowly get bigger and bigger and bigger. And that can lead to putting yourself into an unusual attitude or an undesired aircraft state. The one we want, and how a lot of trainer planes are designed, is the positive dynamic stability. So that initial disturbance over time will get less and less until it returns to its original flight path. So if you're straight and level and you have the aircraft trimmed out good and you push the stick forward, a positive dynamic stable aircraft will start, it'll get smaller, smaller until it's back to straight and level flight. The one we want is positive. The one we really want to avoid is the negative dynamic stability. Next, we have static stability. Once again, there's three types. There's going to be a positive, neutral, and negative. The one we want is positive. The one we really want to avoid is the negative static stability. So in this diagram, the example they use is a pitch down disturbance. So imagine you're going straight and level flight, and that joystick you push forward. The negative static stability shown by the red line, it's going to angle down and then keep progressively getting worse. The neutral static stability, after that initial pitch down disturbance, it's just going to maintain that flight path in whatever direction you push the aircraft or how it's disturbed. The positive static stability, indicated by the purple line, is the one we want. After that initial pitch down or pitch up disturbance, it's going to come back to straight level flight.
Isn't that something you control that with the stick?
Are you saying that initial disturbance or the recovery?
Like the recovery?
So obviously, yes, you as the pilot are going to want to recover from that. But the stability, the more stable an aircraft is, the better it is for training purposes. But yes, as the pilot, you are going to want to correct for that.
Oh, okay.
But different things that could cause it, maybe you bump the stick, maybe there's a bump of turbulence, maybe your passenger bumps the stick. We want a positive static stability and positive dynamic stability. We want the aircraft to return to its original flight path.
Got it.
Yeah, this is all based off of how the aircraft was designed. So now we're going to talk about the forces in a turn. We've talked about lift. But all forces can be split into a vertical and horizontal component. So in straight level flight, when our plane is not turning, we're just flying along like this. All our lift is vertical. It's keeping us in the air. There's no horizontal component of lift. As we start to bank the aircraft in either direction to start a turn, a part of that vertical component is going to turn into horizontal component. So now, as we bank left, we're going to have our vertical component, which slightly decreases. It's still going to be keeping us up, but then now it's split into horizontal component, which then pushes the aircraft into the turn. The steeper you make the bank, the more vertical component you lose, and you're going to have to give it back pressure to maintain altitude. If you start a turn and don't give it any back pressure or pitch up, it's going to want to descend.
So when you're going on turns like that, you don't necessarily need to turn the plane much, you just need to kind of give it a lot more back pressure.
The steeper your turn, yes. So like when you learn the newer steep turns, it's 45-degree bank. Your bank angle is really high. So that vertical component of lift is going to decrease, but it's going to allow you to turn. So that horizontal component is increasing. You're going to have to give it back pressure, otherwise it's going to descend.
Yeah.
So you're not necessarily having to you could keep 45 degrees, you just have to give it more pitch up, more back pressure to maintain altitude. Make sense? Good. Cool. So with this diagram, you see wings level, we only have vertical component of lift. And then with our constant altitude turning, you see that horizontal component of lift come into play. And that's what allows us, the airplane pushes to whatever direction you're banking. So continuing with the forces in a turn, if you're only using ailerons, your vertical lift decreases, as I mentioned, and your horizontal lift increases. So you tend to descend. The more you bank, the more that vertical component decreases and you're going to descend. So to keep your vertical lift the same and not descend, you have to increase your lift by using the elevator to give you that back pressure, pull the stick towards you, increase that angle of attack. And the steeper you go, based off these diagrams right here, the more back pressure you're going to have to give. So as you see, a level flight, lift and weight are equal. There's no horizontal component. When you start to turn, medium bank turn, roughly like 30 degrees, that horizontal component is going to start to be present. And then on a steep bank turn, that horizontal component is a lot more than that vertical component. You have to give it that back pressure. This is now when we start to talk about load factor that you mentioned earlier. Let's see. We'll go back. So as you increase your bank, your load factor is going to also increase. It's essentially like the ratio of your total lift and weight. As you increase that bank, the ratio increases and therefore that load factor increases. So you guys may have heard of a term called G's or G-force. That's the feeling of you getting like pressed into the seat. That's going to increase. And if it's increasing on you, that means it's also increasing on the aircraft, the structural component of the aircraft. So the higher the load factor, the more chances of damaging the aircraft. So whenever we're recovering, in terms of the spin recovery, we leave the ailerons neutral, we use rudder to come out of the spin, and now we're just in a nose down attitude. So we want to just use back pressure. If we're still banked like this, you have to level the wings first so you don't put a lot of load factor onto the wings. You'll learn that with unusual attitudes. It's pretty much when your instructor will have you close your eyes, they take controls and they put you into a weird attitude and you have to recover from it. When your airspeed's increasing and your nose down, your wings are banked, you have to level those wings first before you pitch up. You have to decrease that bank. Because we talked about the more bank you have, the more load factor, the more stress on the aircraft itself, which increases the chance of damaging the aircraft.
Are you checking? Quick.
Oh, yes, yeah, if you have a flight at 1, you can go check in, let them know you're here. This is a chart you're gonna see in your King School training. A lot of the practice questions will have this. It essentially shows the comparison of your bank angle to your load factor or G units. As you increase your bank angle, that load factor or that G units also increase. So the less of the bank, the less of the load factor. The more the bank angle, the more the load factor. And you're gonna see this chart a lot in your King School. So you'll become familiar with it. A lot of the questions we'll ask will be, if you're in a 45-degree bank, what is the load factor going to be? And all you do is come over here to roughly 45, go up, and it's about 1.5 Gs. So adverse yaw, what is yaw? What direction of movement is that? You can demonstrate this. Just regular old yaw.
Yaw is
Mhm.
this, no,
You got it right the first time.
this, oh yeah.
Yaw, yeah.
Like
So that's
that,
just gonna be
okay.
the nose
And then
moving
this
left
is-
and right. That's roll.
And then this is, wait, yaw, roll, and then this one is, I forget, it's called.
Pitch.
Like pitch, yeah.
So with yaw, that movement of the nose going like this, which is controlled by the rudders, there's a term called adverse yaw. Adverse yaw happens when we start to make a turn and we don't use rudders to keep coordinated. Normally, when you make a turn, if you're going to bank to the left, you have to give it a little bit of left rudder. If you bank to the right, you'll have to give a little bit of right rudder. And the reason for that, it's a natural thing that occurs, and we don't want it to happen. So that's why we have to use rudders to stay coordinated. But it's adverse yaw is a tendency of the nose to want to go in the opposite direction of the bank. So if we start a turn to the left, adverse yaw is going to push the nose to the right. If we start a turn to the right, adverse yaw is going to push the nose to the left. So that's why we use rudder, same rudder in the direction of the turn to keep that nose to follow the turn rather than going out like this. Essentially, it's because of the difference of lift and drag in the wing, and we correct it with rudder input. So in this example right here, the left wing is going to be the down aileron. So if that down aileron is like this, now the air is hitting it, which means it's going to push us in a roll to the right. So left wing down aileron is going to push us to the right. This wing is now increased in lift and drag and wants to push the nose to the left. On the other hand, if we want to bank to the left, this aileron is going to be down. It's going to be generating more lift, more drag, and it's going to want to push the nose to the right in the opposite of the turn. So that's why we have to use the same rudder in the direction of the turn we're going. Make sense? Make sense? Turning tendencies, this is going to be one of the.
Hey everyone, my name is Christian Walsh. I'm a CFI here at Sling Pilot Academy. And tonight we're gonna talk about,
So there's 4 turning tendencies: torque, spiraling, slipstream, P factor, gyroscopic precession. I'll briefly talk about them and then we'll watch the video. Torque is going to use Newton's third law. So for every action, there's an equal or opposite reaction. When we're sitting in the cockpit facing forward, that propeller is going to be spinning in a clockwise motion. So from our view, it's going to be spinning to the right. So for every action, there's an opposite or equal reaction. Our propeller is spinning to the right, which means the body of the airplane wants to move to the left. We're going to feel this torque effect a lot when we're on the ground, getting ready to take off. You're going to hear the term right rudder a lot. When you go full power and you're on the takeoff roll, the plane's going to want to kind of roll to the left. And the reason for that is because the propeller is spinning to the right, the body of the plane wants to spin to the left. It's putting more pressure on the left main gear and therefore causing it to roll to the left. So we have to correct for it with right rudder. Spiraling slipstream is going to be the air that comes from our propeller as it's spinning like this. That air is going to follow in a spiral a lot around the fuselage and hit the vertical stabilizer on the left side, pushing it to the right, but pushing our nose to the left. So how do we correct for that? Right rudder. That's right rudder will bring the nose back to center. P factor has to do with the angle of attack of the propeller. You'll notice that the propeller is kind of twisted. So the angle of attack on the descending blade, so the blade coming around this way, moving down, versus the ascending blade, the blade rising, is going to be different. This is going to be most known on takeoff when we're at a high power setting, higher angle of attack, lower airspeed. The nose is going to want to go to the left. So once again, we need right rudder to bring it back to center. The last one, the one that's the most difficult to understand, is called gyroscopic precession. This has to do with the propeller spinning when you're in a climb versus in a descent. The term gyroscope is pretty much a spinning disc, a spinning plane. In our case, in the aircraft, that gyroscope, that spinning disc, is the propeller. The law states that wherever a force is felt on that spinning disc, it reacts 90 degrees ahead. So let's just say we have a spinning disc right here. Like, have you guys ever had like a little top, like as a kid, that you spin and like spins on the table? And if you tap it, it like wobbles. Well, where you tap it isn't where it's going to tilt. It's going to tilt 90 degrees ahead. So let's just say here's our disc and it's spinning in this direction, like our propeller. If you press right here, or a force is felt right here, where is it going to be felt? 90 degrees ahead. Right here. So the force, it reacts right here. If it was spinning in the opposite direction, to the left, and the force is felt here, it would be felt 90 degrees ahead and react right here. So in the case of our propeller, we're in the cockpit and it's spinning to the right. The air is going to hit the propeller differently based off of how our angle of attack. In a climb, we're like this, so our propeller's like this. Is the top or bottom of the propeller hitting the air first? Bottom, right? And we know it's spinning this way, clockwise. So if it's felt on the bottom, where's that force going to be felt? Left side, over here. So it's going to cause us to yaw to the left, and we need right rudder. If we're in a descent, is the top blade or bottom blade being hit by the air first?
Top.
Top. And we know it's spinning this way. So which way is it going to be felt, to the right or left?
To the right.
to the right. So it's going to push her nose to the right, and we have to give it a little left rudder.
Mm.
The FAA used to call these the left turning tendencies. Now they just call them turning tendencies because gyroscopic precession, depending on if you're climbing or descending, will cause the nose to move left, yaw left or right. So we have to use left or right rudder to fix that. We're going to watch this video now. It's
Hey everyone, my name is Christian Walsh. I'm a CFI here at Sling Pilot Academy. And today we're going to talk about the 4 left turning tendencies and what they are and how it affects you in your aircraft. All right, so number 1 is torque. For every force, there is an equal and opposite force. So the effect of torque is the opposite of what's happening with the propeller. So as you look at it, as in the pilot's perspective, the blades are turning to the right, which is clockwise, which means the opposite reaction is going to be a left turn in the roll. So because of this clockwise turn, we have a counterclockwise turn of the aircraft. So this is the equal and opposite reaction working together. So right turn, left turn with the plane here. So that's torque. That's the effect of torque. Okay, so number 2 is called spiraling slipstream. So in an aircraft, when it's moving forward through the sky, as this blade is moving around, it is creating this corkscrew effect. So the FAA calls it a corkscrew effect. And as it moves the air, as the air comes through the blade, it's going over the airframe, moving clockwise, it moves around the aircraft like this in a spiral. And that's what's called the spiraling slipstream. So because of this turning motion and the spiral that it creates, as it hits the vertical stabilizer, it's now going to push on the back of this vertical stabilizer and create a left turn as well. So this is what is our second left turning tendency. Right, so number 3 is P factor. So P factor is the difference in blade angles to the relative wind. So simply put, when you're flying straight and level, the descending blade to your right and the ascending blade to your left both have the same effect. So when you're straight and level, the angle of attack to the relative wind stays the same. But when you change your angle of attack to the relative wind that's coming toward the aircraft, you can see the right side has a much larger angle. This creates more lift on the right side of the propeller, causing the plane to yaw left. All right, so number 4 is called gyroscopic precession. So just like a gyroscope in our 6-pack of instruments, it's essentially a spinning disc. This isn't really a phenomenon that happens in a tricycle. This happens in a tail dragger. So when you're flying a tail dragger in the takeoff, what they need to do is pitch the aircraft down so they can bring the back of the aircraft up and bring that tail dragger off the ground. When this happens, it creates a moment at the top of the propeller where there's a force applied. So as that force is applied, it is felt 90 degrees from that point of origin. So if it's pushed here, it's actually felt 90 degrees to the right of the clockwise turning propeller, which gives us another yaw moment, which is another turning tendency. It's an example of this. You might find this in a normal classroom in aviation school. Is as the blade is turning to the right, if I was to pitch forward, it actually wants to turn to the left. This is involuntary from me. So if I do that again, spinning this forward, it turns to the left. This is how helicopters fly. It's all the same principle. Like I said, it doesn't happen in a tricycle as much or really at all, but this is important for a tail dragger, this principle. To summarize, all these 4 left turning tendencies that you see and that you'll feel in the plane don't happen all at once. They can happen at different phases of flight. But where these are most pronounced is when you're at a low airspeed and you have a high RPM and you're creating a lot of airflow, a lot of torque, and that could be when you're in the takeoff roll. So you have a forward slow speed, you have a high amount of air moving across the aircraft. And that's when you get these, which you counteract by doing a little bit of right rudder.
Now that we've gone over the basics, Sling Pilot Academy co-owner and aerobatic pilot Matt Lipnitsky is going to explain how these left turning tendencies are even more prominent while flying aerobatics.
We're really happy at Sling Pilot Academy to be adding a super decathlon to our fleet. The super decathlon will allow us to explore spins to a higher level with our students and pilots and instructors, and will allow us to explore basic aerobatics and upset recovery training. The pursuit of aerobatics is really important in your journey to master in flight. Aerobatics allows you to explore much more of the envelope of flight than you do during normal flying. Aerobatics takes you from below the stall speed of the airplane to its VNE, all through all flight regimes, pitch attitudes, and bank angles, and it allows you to really master flight to a high degree. For example, learning about left turning tendencies can seem pretty academic and theoretical when you're just doing normal flight. During aerobatics, it becomes a very practical thing that you have to deal with and correct for at all times, and you become very aware of how they all interact with each other. For example, in a simple aerobatic maneuver like a hammerhead, where we're going to pull vertical, we're going to get to very close to 0 speed at the top, we're going to kick it over and then come straight back down again. During that one maneuver, we start out at a very high speed, maybe at 160. So when we pull up, we're at 160. At that speed, the aerodynamic forces that our controls are able to exert on the airflow keep us straight and stable and counteract a lot of the left turning tendencies we've been talking about. As we start slowing down, our spiraling slipstream, which extends around the fuselage, begins to bunch up. So as we start slowing down, the spiraling slipstream bunches up and starts applying a greater and greater force on the vertical tail. And if uncorrected, will lead to the airplane yawing to the left like this. And you notice this force getting stronger and stronger as you ascend on a vertical line, and the airplane will begin to yaw to the left. So the way we remedy that is we start applying an increasing amount of right rudder, and that makes the airplane ascend vertically. At the same time, the torque of the engine and prop, the propeller spinning clockwise, it makes the airframe want to rotate counterclockwise. At high speed, that's a very negligible effect, but as you start slowing down, the airplane is going to begin to roll to the left. So the remedy for that is you have to add an increasing amount of right aileron. So with no application of right rudder and right aileron on the upline, when you pull up, the airplane will begin rolling to the left and yawing to the left, and you'll end up flying other than a vertical up in no time. But with the application of increasing amount of right stick and an increasing amount of right rudder, you'll be able to counteract those forces and keep it flying vertically upwards. Then when we get to the top and we close to 0 airspeed, we kick full left rudder to rotate the airplane on this axis, on the vertical axis. At this point, we applying a force on the right side of the spinning prop disc, the gyroscope. And that translates, because the propeller is spinning clockwise, it translates 90 degrees later to a force on the bottom of the disc that wants to tip the nose over like that. So if we simply kick full left rudder to rotate the airplane at the top of the hammerhead, it'll fall over onto its back as we go over the top. So to counteract that, as we kick full left rudder, we apply a decent amount of forward stick to hold the nose down, and that'll allow the airplane to rotate on its vertical axis and not flop out of the sky and then fly it downwards. So in that one maneuver, as we've reached the top of the hammerhead, we've learned more about spiraling slipstream, gyroscopic precession, and torque effects than we could ever have learned theoretically from books or just academically. So that's one of the reasons why we love aerobatics so much and why we want everyone to master, to some degree, the art of aerobatics and controlling the airplane through much more of its envelope than a normal flight. If there's anything you'd like to add, or if you have any suggestions, please leave them in the comments section of this video. And don't forget.
Okay, so obviously we're not going to be doing aerobatics on a regular here in the Sling 2. That was just to demonstrate how when you fly different aircraft and different types of flight, those left turning tendencies are still gonna play a part. But that first part of the video, I hope that sort of made sense and kind of touched up on what I talked about. Different phases of flight, the turn tendencies might be a little more relevant than other phases of flights, but we're going to have to correct for it with that right rudder, and in some cases left aileron, or sorry, right rudder and right aileron. Does that make sense? The gyroscopic precession is kind of a tough one to understand, and then the P factor, just thinking about the angle of attack of the propeller, how it's twisted. Those two are the tougher ones. Spiraling the slipstream, pretty straightforward. That air is just flowing around the fuselage, hitting the vertical stabilizer, and then the torque and reaction is the equal or opposite reaction. Propeller swings clockwise, plane wants to rotate to the left, counterclockwise. Everybody good on that? Cool. Going back to the use of rudders and coordination and turns, we talked about if you make a bank to the left or right and you're just using aileron, that adverse yaw will occur, and the nose is going to want to yaw to the outside of the turn. So that's why we use the same rudder in the direction of the turn to counteract that adverse yaw. You're going to hear about two different types of turns. There's going to be a skidding turn and a slipping turn. Skidding turn is going to be when you're banking to the left or right, let's just say to the left, and you use too much left rudder. That's going to bring the nose yaw too far to the left and really sticking that tail up to the right. So you can think of it as like Tokyo drift, you know, when they're drifting and that back end wants to spin way to the outside. It's sort of the same concept. Your turn coordinator is going to look like this. The ball is going to be high. Pretty much that's indicating that you either need to release some left rudder or step on the right rudder to center that ball. On the other hand, slipping turn is when we're making, let's just say, a turn to the left and we don't give enough left rudder or we even give it right rudder, that ball is going to go all the way to the left in the direction of the turn. Out of these two, the skidding turn is the more dangerous one. A lot of low-level spins occur in the traffic pattern, from that downwind to base and base to final. A lot of people sometimes think they're going to overshoot the final approach and will try to use a lot more left rudder or rudder in the direction of the turn to make sure that they don't overshoot the approach. And that can cause a spin. And at that altitude, you're not going to have time to recover from it. A slipping turn is something you'll practice more so on the commercial level. This is safe if done properly. It's a way for you to lose a little more altitude without your airspeed increasing like crazy. But always keep an eye on the turn coordinator. There's a phrase, ball high, you're going to die, ball low, you can go slow. If you're making a turn to the left and you see that ball on the side of the high wing, that's no good. If you see the ball low, you can go slow and that's safer. The reason for that, or reason for the stall and spin, if you're making a turn to the left, right? So we're trying to turn to the runway this way, make a turn to the left, and you give it too much, and the nose goes way far inside the turn, the tail goes to the outside of the turn, and you're coming this way, the fuselage is now blocking the airflow over the low wing. So that low wing isn't getting the airflow and can stop producing lift, just like in a stall. If the low wing stops producing lift, it's just going to drop, and it happens like instantly. In a slipping turn, if you're banking to the left and you're like this, now the low wing is in the direct path of the relative wing. The high wing is now blocked by the fuselage. So if you do lose lift, it's just going to drop back to normal. Does that make sense? So avoid skips, skid turns at all costs. Slipping turns are going to be something you'll practice, and those are better. All right, going into drag. There's parasite drag and induced drag, as we talked about earlier. The parasite drag, there's three types. There's going to be interference drag, skin friction drag, and form drag. Interference drag is going to be due to different components of the aircraft body. So this is typically where the fuselage and wings meet. That angle in between the fuselage and the wing is where that interference drag is going to happen. Essentially, it's going to create sort of turbulent air, a disruption of air, and that's why we get that interference drag. Notice on the pre-flight checklist, there's going to be a section to say, check the fairings. The fairings, I think I showed you guys yesterday, is going to be that plastic piece that's in between where the wing and fuselage meet. That's there to help reduce that interference drag. I believe the smaller the angle between the fuselage and the wing, the more interference drag we'll experience. The bigger the angle between the fuselage and the wing, the less interference drag.
Would you say that again?
The bigger the angle, the less interference drag. The smaller the angle, the more interference drag. And I think there'll be a slide on it next. Skin friction drag is simply due to the air that's directly attached or directly touching the body. The way it's kind of worded is a little weird, but think about the air. Think about, okay, like I have my two hands, right? If I want to go like this, they're not touching. There's no connection between it. So there's going to be less friction, less drag. But if I want to go like this and rub them together, now they're in contact with each other. So there's going to be that friction. It's going to heat up and create more drag. Same with the air. The air is directly flowing over and touching the wing. Even though air is an invisible, thing around us at all times, it's still touching us, right? It's still touching the aircraft, it's still touching the body and the wings. So as that air is flowing over the wing, it's creating friction and creating some heat, just as if you would like rub your hands together and therefore creating that friction drag. The last one is the form drag, and this is pretty much due to different components on the aircraft, how the aircraft is designed. So it's going to be the antennas, the rivets, if there's ice, if there's dirt, if there are bugs. Now it's not a smooth surface. So now that air is hitting those things, the antenna, the little rivets and screws and ice, and now we're now losing that component of lift because that air flowing over the wings or over the fuselage is being disrupted by whatever is on that surface. These three types of drag, of parasite drag, interference, friction, and form drag, our drag will increase with speed. So as we get faster, that drag is going to increase. A good example I like to give is when you're driving with your hand out the window, on just like a side street versus on the highway. On the highway, you're a lot faster, your hand's going to get pushed back more, and that's because of that drag. Any questions on these? Good. The next one is and here's a picture of parasite drag. So best way to explain it is think of that flat plate, like your hand outside the window, you have it horizontal, or vertical like this. It's going to push your hand back. As you start to turn it like that, it's going to become more aerodynamic and there's going to be less drag. It's going to push your hand back a lot less. Kind of the same concept with this. This is like how they try to design aircraft, the wings and like the fuselage to make it as aerodynamic as possible.
And I get to go.
Yes, yeah. The second type of drag is going to be induced drag. You'll hear a term that this is a byproduct of lift. Induced drag is formed due to lift. As soon as the aircraft takes off, induced drag is created. It's a result to the pressure equalization between the high pressure under the wing, the low pressure above the wing. So the more lift we generate, the more induced drag we're gonna generate. You're gonna hear something called wingtip vortices. These are pretty much rotating columns of air that are generated because of lift. It can be dangerous for other aircraft. So at times when you're taking off or landing behind a bigger aircraft, you might hear caution for wake turbulence. Wake turbulence is the result of the wingtip vortices. As the airplane gets heavier and larger, you'll hear a term heavy, clean, and slow. So bigger like jet aircraft that are a lot bigger, a lot heavier, that are taking off or landing, that are generating more lift, therefore in turn generating more wingtip vortices. We'll go more in depth to it later of different ways to avoid the wake turbulence and different ways to take off or land behind a bigger aircraft that's generating the wingtip vortices. We'll talk about that on a different day, but just know that induced drag is the byproduct of lift. So as you create lift, you create the induced drag, and bigger aircraft that are generating more lift create those wingtip vortices and create wake turbulence. So this is a sort of a chart with the two types of drag, induced drag and formed drag. Your total drag versus the relationship to airspeed. Formed drag, which is one of the parasite drags, as your airspeed increases, that parasite or formed drag will also increase. As your airspeed increases, that induced drag is going to decrease. So as I mentioned earlier, induced drag is a byproduct of lift. When we are taking off and creating more lift, we're usually a higher angle of attack and at a lower airspeed than when we're in cruise. So that's why induced drag is a lot higher at a lower airspeed. Here's the thing I was talking about. The larger angle between the fuselage and the wing creates less drag. And then a smaller angle, like below the wing where the landing gear attaches, it's a smaller angle, therefore more drag. The next few pictures I think are just kind of goofy pictures that everything is somewhat aerodynamic. Certain things are less aerodynamic than others. And yep, that concludes aerodynamics. So we still have like 4 minutes. So if you guys have any questions, now's a good time.
Wingtip vortices, do they travel outward and downward? It's like,
So it's, yeah. So it's going to be outward from, so let's just say this is the wing from the side. Here's the, this is going to be a horrible drawing, so we're looking at the plane from behind. So here's the root of the wings, here's the tip of the wings. The wingtip vortices are going to go like that on each side. So it's going to rotate outward, inward, and then downward. So wingtip vortices will sink. Over time, they're going to sink. They don't just float in the air. They will sink down, eventually hit the ground and no longer be a thing. So that's why whenever we're traveling behind an aircraft that's generating these wingtip vortices, they sink. So a good drawing that I like to do, first and foremost, the best thing you can do is you can just request to have a delayed takeoff. So if they tell you you're clear for takeoff, caution for wake turbulence, if you don't feel comfortable, just say, I'd like to wait a few minutes for the wake turbulence to kind of go away. So here's our runway. Let's just say there's a big aircraft right here. They're taking off. Their wingtip vortices are going to be behind them, sinking down. If we want to take off behind them, do you think it would make sense to take off after their liftoff point or before? Before, because they sink. So as long as we take off before, they're not going to go up. They're only going to go down. So if we take off after the aircraft, that'll allow us to stay above the path of the wingtip vortices. Let's just say a big aircraft is coming in to land like this, and they're going to touch down right here. So those wingtip vortices are going to sink down and behind. So if we're coming into land, if we land before their landing spot, we're now traveling through the path of those wingtip vortices. So what we want to do is we want to land past their landing point so we can stay above those wingtip vortices and avoid the wake turbulence. Cool. Any other questions with that? No?
No,
Okay.
done.
And I'm gonna quiz you tomorrow.
Oh, God. Alright.
Yeah, so if nobody has any other questions, then that's it for today, so. I'll leave for Jessica.
I'm not gonna do the standing, I want to do the snaps.
That works. Take that.
Too cool.
Tomorrow we're gonna start covering piston engines and intro to systems.
I still can't let the kid to school.
Do what?
I still can't let the kid to school.
Okay,
I contacted Torrance again today.
did you send it to that training email I sent to you?
No, because I saw it right
You're
when I was
fine.
walking into here.
Okay. So for those of you who do not have the Kings, I think it would only be you two and JT.
They gave me a new key. Sorry, I just interrupted. They gave me a new key. I just don't know how to get rid of my old one and put in the new key.
Okay.
Like they fixed it for me and said like, here's your new key for the new course, but every time I log in, it just takes me straight to the instrument one and
Okay, let's, do you have time right now?
yeah.
Okay, let's try to do that. Were you able to get yours, or did you email the training at Sling Pilot Academy?
I was able to do it, but I already had it from my previous school anyways, so.
Oh,
I had to, when I logged in, I had to log in first the website. Put in the key, then. I think that's how I did it, so I was able to do it through the website.
okay, so you have access to do the King school and
Yep.
finish it.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
Do I send you the certificate or?
So you'll need the certificate for graduation, and when you do your written exam, you'll also need the certificate for the endorsement from your instructor. There's also a practice test at the end to help with your written exam. I recommend doing those.
Yeah, those are done.
Cool. What were the other things? ForeFlight,
Flight, that's the one I'm working on. I still have Flight, but it's like I can't get the.
so you're all in the Discord, you all have the Kings except for you. And then ForeFlight, you said you didn't get logged into the Sling one?
Yeah, I can't, like, I created a different account and everything so that it would like, compete with my current subscription. And when I click on the link, and I've already talked with them, when I click on the link, it just doesn't let me join it.
So- Okay, I was told to email for the ForeFlight, email the training@slingpilotacademy.com. If you haven't done that already.
I mean, I've been talking with Monica on front desk, but
Okay.
maybe I'll have her.
So the training at slingpilotacademy.com is, I think, goes directly to the director of training, Andrew DeClue. And he personally was like, have them email this email. So I told him the front desk email hasn't really been helping as much. So send it to the training one, so you can get that 4-flight subscription. And it goes for you too. And then, yeah.
This is.
Question.